and welcome to BTP Let's Talk Edition. We have Dan here with us. How are you, Dan?
What up, buddy? Life is great, excited, full of energy, motivated, ready for action.
Amazing. I love the enthusiasm. I love the energy. It's so good. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about how does traveling change us? I mean, we all have traveled, most of us at least, and we have our own experiences, share our experiences of traveling. There are different aspects of how we can say it changes us. First of all, does it really change us?
Well, let's be honest. I don't think that traveling per se will change you for the same reason that ultimately reading a book cannot change you or watching a
Hmm.
specific amazing movie can. Ultimately, it's about your attitude. That is, if your mind is focused on acquiring education and change, of course, you will change. However, let's be honest. Traveling these days is first and foremost a form of entertainment, and it's a business, a very profitable business that is all around the world. And unfortunately, it is marketed in a very, very wrong way. I mean, I have so much trouble with the traveling standards these days. I can just literally start shouting at this microphone here, just express my anger. But ultimately, can traveling change us? Yes. In most cases, the way it's done these days by these whole, I don't know, let's say travel agents and whatnot, does that change us? I don't think so. So traveling can change us, but it requires a specific mindset and a specific way of traveling that will change you. Otherwise, there's no difference between traveling or watching National Geographics, from my perspective.
Very, very good, very good. So ultimately, I guess we can say traveling is an experience, and experiences do change us or can change us. And the more involved or the more interactive the experience, the more change you can see. But at the end of the day, as you mentioned, I think it does come back to our mindset, whether we want to actually change, whether we are going after the right kind of experiences and directed experiences to change us. Because you can, if you randomly go after experiences, then you will be dragged here and there because it will change you randomly. You never know when you're going to end up. um, but
Exactly.
but ultimately, you're very correct. Like any other experience, traveling can change you, and it does. And I'm gonna actually give you my first drastic transformative experience I had with traveling, and that was when I had a chance to go to China a long, long time ago. I think I was in grade 10 ish. I don't particularly remember, but I was still in high school, and it was a very good experience. I got to explore China, and I had a friend there, so I wasn't all lost. So he would basically direct me what to do, what not to do, and it was very good. I think it was about 12 days. It was a very good crunch because we had just so little time for such a big country. I only went to Shanghai and Beijing, but it was an amazing experience. It definitely opened my eyes, and I'm gonna talk about it in a minute. But I want to get your first impression of a great transformative traveling experience. When was it?
Well,
What was your experience?
that's right. Well, first of all, for me personally, because as you know, I work internationally, so I work in different countries. And
Hmm.
believe it or not, for me, traveling has always been about making a living as well as learning and acquiring education. I cannot think of anything that is more educational
Right.
than basically the experience to get in traveling,
Hmm.
because ultimately it's that by facing with the different culture and a different way of doing things, that's when you're able to contrast it with your own culture and language,
I see.
and that's when you truly acquire experience. I've been traveling since a very young age, of course, to various countries and around the world, but ultimately true transformation from my perspective came when I decided to not just travel but to actually work and to create businesses in different countries. Because I think that is a whole, and it's a total different level in that case. Because in
Hmm.
that case, you're no longer just observing that culture or language or, I don't know, society. You're actually taking part in it. And
Precisely.
that's where I think everything changes. Because I mentioned earlier, I have a problem with the current standards of the travel industries. Because nowadays, how do most people travel? First of all, they get into a huge group of people. Let's say a tour of made of 10, 20, 30 people.
I see.
They all travel together. During this entire time, they're spending more time with themselves and they're interacting more among each other than they are with
I
the
see.
foreign environment and the people. They almost, it's like they're in a bubble made by their people, and they are now just looking outside as entertainment, like they're watching a movie together. It's like, hey, look at these guys, they dress this way. Hey, pretty funny, right? So this, from my perspective, is not what I call transformative travel, because in this condition, you are simply involved with what I call being observing together. This has no impact. You cannot understand how things are because you are judging things. You see, that's the problem.
Hmm.
You will never change by traveling if you're judging the environment around you. And
I see.
the problem is this: when you're traveling in a tour, which is why I never, ever travel in tours, ever. In my entire life, never done it, will never do it. It's just stupid from my perspective.
Hmm.
So when you travel in a tour, you are not traveling, you're just spending quality time with the people that you have traveled with. Because let's be honest, during the entire time, who are the people you spend the most time with? The people in your goddamn tour,
Yeah.
not the foreign environments. So for that reason, first of all, I'm a huge fan of never ever traveling with tours, ever. And number two, when you're traveling, I'm a fan of immersing ourselves in that environment. That is, trying to fit in, if you will. And that requires a lot of skills, which we'll hopefully discuss in this podcast. What are those skills that are required to do this? But ultimately, for me, that transformation happens when I travel, number one, not for entertainment, but for, let's say, work or some tasks or some responsibilities. And number two, when I'm not judging the environment, I'm actually immersing myself in it and letting it influence my mind, thoughts, and way of thinking. So perhaps maybe I could find a better way of doing things.
Amazing. And I had the privilege of not going on tours ever, same as you mentioned.
Very good.
And
Very good.
yeah, I mean it's a different kind of experience. I don't like when I'm going on a travel, as you mentioned. I want to actually get myself into the new culture, the new experiences, right? So if I'm not, by the way, I'm gonna say that traveling through work is actually my favorite kind of travel because not that you're putting your money making machine on halt, not that you're spending a lot of money, but rather actually making money through your traveling experience. So,
I mean, that's the
so
best thing, man. Just
of
imagine you're
course,
traveling and you're making money. That's the best thing ever in the world.
exactly. So that's a good gig, I would say.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's my favorite. But then beyond that, let's say that might not be feasible for a lot of people. So I'm gonna actually ask you this question first. Would you say if you're not traveling through work, if that's not an option, would your favorite kind of travel would be some sort of like a backpacking kind of experience, going with yourself or maybe your best buddy or something like that?
Well, here's my rule for traveling. I got buddies all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
I got friends, business partners, let's say clients from all around the world. I have one rule for traveling.
Mm-hmm.
Traveling is, if done for the purpose of education and learning,
Mm-hmm.
should not be done in groups, which
True.
is why I prefer not to travel with, let's say, friends. If I want to meet my friends there, I say, you go there and I'll meet you there. Why?
Mm.
First of all, my travel experience begins at the airport. Long before I'm actually on the
Precisely. I
airport,
love airports. Sorry, keep going.
literally, it's important. I mean, it's like a sort of meditation, actually. So here's what I do before ever travel to any country. First of all, I ask myself, do I speak the language of that country? If I do, then I forbid myself from using English. That is,
Mm-hmm.
from then on, let's say 24 hours before my trip, English dies. I mean, like, if I ever use English, it's just for very, very basic things. Let's say I want to like put let's say an Instagram story on, or I just want to make a post on Twitter. So I keep that English to a maximum minimum, and I immerse myself in some audiobooks, audio programs, or something in that target language, so that my mind is already getting immersed in that language before I even am, on the airplane.
I see.
So at that time, I let my mind be fully immersed in that language and the culture of that country. And then I also think about all of my plans there. What are my plans? Is it about work? Let's say we're going to do this project, this one. Okay, let's do it. So I focus entirely on that one. And more importantly, I do not allow the former environment to influence in any way. So I try to keep everything that is not about that country or that language to an absolute minimum. And
Mm-hmm.
only then I am in the right state of mind to actually arrive. And as I mentioned earlier, I have no problem with networking. So anywhere I go, very quickly I can make some friends there.
Mm-hmm.
So fortunately, since in certain places that I work regularly, I already have a huge and thriving social circle. So when I get to a place, my job is to associate with my friends in that country. I
I see.
love all of my friends in every country around the world, but when I'm in each country, the people in that country become the top priority
Hmm.
because ultimately I'm there physically, and it is my job and responsibility to help these guys, to be with them, to improve their mind, to somehow make them feel happier. And in the process, of course, these amazing individuals make me feel great as well. So ultimately, that's my favorite style of traveling. It's literally like it begins like in a meditative state where
Yep.
I'm focused on the country, and I refuse to use English. Basically, I mean, right now we're talking right now on this podcast here. I should tell all of our listeners here that I have not used English in the past few weeks, basically, except for random occasions where I had no choice. For example, if I had to put let's say, an Instagram story on, I have to speak English because most of my followers are, English speakers.
Hmm.
So all of these things, but ultimately, everything with respect to English is kept to a minimum, and
Hmm.
all of my focus is on the target language because this allows me to somehow uh, fit in the environment and to think the way they do. And this is a very nice thing because I've always been a fan of anthropology because it allows me to fully immerse myself in a foreign culture. So that's how I think traveling can change you if you are really willing to change, if you want to be influenced by the environment, and if you want to actually immerse yourself in it. However, if you're traveling to say, oh, look at that one, they got a fucking, they got a naked statue, hey, pretty funny. Like, imagine you're going to Italy, for example, and you
Right.
look at these things. That's not educational, dude. You're just having fun. It's like literally, it's like watching National Geographic. It's like, dude, man, these kangaroos are having sex here. Pretty funny. Ha ha ha. I mean, like, because of this, ultimately, I really believe that traveling is educational when you are there to fit in, to immerse yourself in the environment. I really, even in the language. I mean, I really believe that if you are only relying on English when traveling outside of the United States and Canada, of course, outside the English-speaking countries, then you will have a serious problem. If you're going to London, no problem. Be my guest. Use English. But if you're going to a country where English is not the main language, then I really believe that using that, second language or whatever can really help in this process.
Amazing. Yeah, I think. Well, if you're going to London, you gotta start speaking British. So.
Well, that's fortunately because I've tried this. Fortunately, it's not necessary. And
I
ironically,
know.
here's the fun thing about Americans: like when we go to like places like London or let's say to Australia, Sydney,
Yeah.
when they hear American accent, dude, man, these guys are really impressed because it's kind of like when the British or the Australians come to
Right.
America or Canada.
Right.
Like we
Right.
find them quite unique and distinct. The
Yes.
same thing happens when North Americans go to like let's say England or Australia, and
Right.
our accent is pretty bought there, man. Trust me, it's pretty attractive. It
very,
stands out.
very interesting. Yeah, that's true.
Right.
It's the rarity of it that gives it the quality. It's
That's
not
right.
quality per se, but
Exactly.
joke aside. So back to my personal experience. Obviously, I was really young to know any better. I didn't do any of the rituals, but then sort of I did. And what I mean by that, when I was going to the airport, I was super excited. I just wanted to immerse in the experience. Thankfully, I didn't go with the tour again, and I was basically always. I was still in a group of my parents and my couple of my friends, so that was not a choice for me at the time. But then I really wanted to go out and try to communicate. Obviously, I didn't speak a word Mandarin, so it was very difficult, and a lot of people wouldn't speak English, so we didn't use common languages. We used sign language mostly
Oh boy.
to try to communicate. But it was super fun because I got to experience a lot of cool stuff. See people that are drastically different than I used to at the time. So I think I think we talked about it a lot. But then the cultures are different, right? The history is amazing. I mean, that's another part of the travel that I really like. I get to know a little bit about the story, not of the history, not of the history books, but rather firsthand from people's opinion, local people's opinion, not some
Exactly.
historian who wrote the book. That's perfect, by the way. I have nothing against that. But that's a different experience that you read it in a book by a historian who might not have been out of the culture, but rather firsthand from the people. Um, so it was definitely an amazing experience at the time. How about that? Like we talked about the social aspect of it quite a lot. You talked about it mostly about the social aspect a lot, which I completely agree with you. But how about the historical aspect of your travels? How do you fit that into your travels, or don't
Well, you
you?
see, the history of a nation is what makes that nation ultimately, because uh,
Precisely.
everything. I mean, everything goes back to their history. Like, how have these people lived in the
Mm-hmm.
past? And because of this, when you go to a certain place, one of the first things I do actually before I even start, let's say I want to start a new project in a new country, one of the first things I do is to actually say their history. To know what these guys were doing in the past, like what kind of governments they had in the past. Was it like a, let's say, dictatorship, or let's say, was it like a kingdom? Was it the democracy? So you want to figure out their background in advance, basically, to find out how they are somehow behaving. But
Right.
here's my personal experience, given that I work in different countries, and ultimately it comes down to generation. That is, the history of a nation affects the older generations far more than the younger generations. And I call this the Americanization of the youth.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, from my perspective, given the fact that I work in not only a variety of different nations from different backgrounds, not all of them are necessarily Western or whatever, and I've realized that the younger generations are, for the most part, very similar all around the world. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're spending most of their time, stuck on Twitters or Instagram or Facebook, and they do things that are quite westernized, basically.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you really want to get a good taste of the history of a nation, I recommend to actually spend time with the older generations because they do have a much, much deeper touch. Now, this is both good and bad. The good side is that you can actually get to know the history, but the bad side is that I think that modernity itself is about making history redundant. That is, a lot of the historical things that have made and shaped a nation, from my perspective, are now disappearing worldwide, and we're seeing similar cultures among the youth of all nations. Think
Right.
of, let's say, a young man in Sweden versus one guy in Russia versus one guy in, let's say, I don't know, Italy, or one in Middle East or Dubai or whatever. It doesn't matter. The youth are starting to live or even dress very similarly,
Mm-hmm.
uh, as opposed to their basically older generations. However, ultimately, history does make a huge impact, and it's very important to do that. But ultimately, if you really want to get a grasp of the history of a nation, ultimately it comes down to the older generations, as well as, of course, their museums and historical sites, which
Right.
can really inspire you in that regard.
Yeah, very true. I mean, obviously, globalization has changed a lot of things. So we are exposed to the same material as a younger generation. As the younger generation actually come to be, they will be even more exposed to the similar materials worldwide because of the idea of globalization and the fact that in the world, the existence of internet first and foremost, and the globalization itself. So yeah, that's very true, and that's very natural, given how the things have turned. And when you said like the sites, like when you're talking about, for example, I don't know, a monument that you can actually see three-dimensionally, touch perhaps, maybe probably not, but you know what I mean. Like breathe around.
Sometimes you cannot touch it, buddy. Trust me, I'm telling you.
Yeah,
Try it.
well,
Don't try it, man. You're gonna have some problem.
you gotta be kicked out or something. Yeah, so
Exactly.
yeah, be a good guy. Um, yeah, no, but you know what I mean. Like actually living near it, and when something happened, know that it happened right here when you just stand maybe thousands of years ago, but nevertheless right here. It's amazing. I think it's a ultimately a super exciting experience, a thrilling experience. The historical aspect of it. There's one more aspect to traveling that I find super exciting, and that is the nature. Because when we start moving around world, the nature changes really rapidly, and you get to see a lot of different ecosystems with different maybe specific species to that ecosystem that is you can only find there. You mentioned kangaroos in Australia, for example. It's like like basically a trademark. It's like it's Australia. A kangaroo in Australia are the same thing. So these things are also very interesting to me. You get to see deserts on the other hand. You get to see glaciers. You get to see I don't know, jungles or different types of like oceans. Depending on what you're into, it can really affect you. And we are eventually all animals, and animals do need nature, do like it. And I personally, when I go and see, when I put myself, because I live in a big city, I've been born and raised in a big city, so I've always been in a big city. So whenever I get out of the big city and go actually to the natural nature, it's super exciting for me because it's a different experience, and I get to breathe fresh air, I guess.
Wow.
So that part of it is
Very good.
also very, very interesting to me. Even like
Exactly.
short travels, not going across the border, perhaps just take a couple of hours drive to the north of, I don't know, to a cottage or something, depending on where you are or whatnot. So how about that? Can you give me some insights or experiences of your own?
Well, obviously, nature is a different story because nature, from my perspective, that's not about somehow linking to the people, but it's more about connecting to that environment around you. And
Precisely.
ultimately, this goes down to your temperament. That is, it all depends on your temperament. I'm a huge fan of somehow finding a connection with the nature while I'm exercising. I do
Mm-hmm.
marathons every week in the nature, and I run for hours and hours in the nature. And I love to see the trees and the environment because it gives me a great and a fresh sense that I truly enjoy and find inspiring. So that is because of this. So you don't need to necessarily travel to any one country to enjoy the nature because nature is pretty much almost
Very true.
identical in most places. And it also comes down to your temperament. The more introverted a person is, the more he or she enjoys connecting to the environment, the
Mm-hmm.
nature, and the more extroverted they are, the more they care about the people around them, and they want to connect
Mm-hmm.
with the people. Now, as you might guess, I'm more on the extroverted side than the introverted side, which means
Right.
for me, it's always that connection to the people that is a lot more important than it is with the nature, which is why during most of my travels, I spend most of my time interacting with people, and I don't do very much sightseeing
Mm-hmm.
because it all comes down to your temperaments. Because that level of connection that I get with people, I can never get with the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing applies to introverts in a different way, because they cannot ever get that level of connection from the people that you get from the nature and whatnot. So this ultimately comes down to your temperament. Both are wonderful and they're great parts. And the modern tourism, modern tourism industry is actually focused more on the latter. That is, it serves an introverted audience a lot more than it serves an extroverted audience because it's more about
Right.
sightseeing, it's more about excursions and going through the nature and whatnot. And that is precisely why it's probably not for me because I am a huge fan of connecting with people, not necessarily the environment. And I, quite frankly speaking, don't even notice the difference very much. Like if I'm walking in New York, let's say, or Moscow or Dubai, for me, the environment really does not make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
What does make a huge difference is what language am I hearing to my in my ears, and what are the people around me? What are they doing? So it all depends on your focal point, whether or not you're an introvert or an extrovert, and more importantly, what are your purposes. But ultimately, I love both of them. And for me personally, nature is something that I do usually when I'm at home. Let's say you're somewhere and you want to go for enjoy the nature. You can go to a park near your house and enjoy the nature. But quite frankly, for me, I'm not going to travel to China to go to the jungle somewhere because
Right.
ultimately that's just I can just go to jungle anywhere else, right?
Right.
So
Right.
for me, what differentiates nations is not the nature,
Mm-hmm.
rather it is the people, the culture, and the language. So that's my focal point in traveling, and it also comes down to my extroverted nature as well. So these are all linked together. However, for the more introverted people, when they're traveling, of course, nature plays a huge role.
Usually.
And ultimately, that's one of the things. Like, whenever I travel to any country, usually I only stay in the capital city. I rarely travel outside of the capital city of that country because for me, people are people everywhere, right? So just
Mm-hmm.
I might as well be in the capital city because there's more business opportunities and whatnot, right?
Right.
So ultimately, that's about your focal point, what you really want, and what are your focuses in that regard.
Well, very good. That makes a lot of sense actually, and I think you're right. It depends on your personality, which one you embrace. But well, on a slightly different topic, I'll tell you why it's connected. The people recently there was a lake found under on the surface of the Mars, which under it we found water and potentially microbial life. So maybe we can go there. That would be definitely different environments in terms of
Wow.
sometime. So that was also
Got to learn Martian language, I guess.
I know
We got to speak with the aliens.
I don't know how to talk. I don't know how to.
All
It's
right,
gonna be
that'll be
difficult.
amazing. But actually, I heard that there's a lot of progress being made in space travel these days, especially by Leon. What was that?
Oh, Elon,
Elon
Elon
Musk.
Musk.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah,
Elon Musk and SpaceX and all these
yep.
things. And then they're working on a lot of great projects. I mean, what's the story by that one? Like, what's the current status on space traveling?
Well, we are making a lot of good progress. Of course, the first milestone, major milestone, was made a few years ago by SpaceX, Elon Musk's SpaceX, where they were able to land the booster of the shuttle. Where because, well, obviously it's almost $1 billion device that you're just throwing out, so you're saving a lot of money on that. So they are able to. So that's a good way, because if you want to keep doing space travels, then you have to be able to make the cost much more efficient. Think about it. If you're traveling with an airplane, every time you travel, you throw out the airplane, then it's going to be extremely
Wow.
expensive. So the first
So
step
now
is
this is no longer the case, right? So they can actually
yeah,
keep that stuff.
they can keep the booster. The nose goes into space, of course, but then the booster, which is actually the most expensive part, stays. It like comes back down and lands on Earth, so we can actually reuse it at least multiple times. So yeah,
Good. Very good.
that's a major progress that
And how do they land on the moon exactly, or like Mars or whatever? Like,
oh, they
because they have
parachute
the
it down
booster.
though. Yeah, they
Oh,
parachute it down there.
parachute.
Yeah, so they
Interesting. Pretty
use
cool.
the yeah they use the gravity of the planet or the moon, and they parachute it down. At least at this point, it will be perhaps different in a near future. But then yeah, so that's one of the major events that has happened. NASA's working on its own deep space shuttle, which is called I forgot what it's called actually. Anyhow, so they're working on that, which is not necessarily for like maybe astronauts, but not for like regular people traveling. What the SpaceX is currently working on is a very gigantic spacecraft that actually can take many people to take them to Mars, basically for commercial or literally travel purposes, not as you being an astronaut. That's a different story, of course. So
Very good. Very good.
that's ultimately the goal, to take people to Mars, and make Mars create a Mars colony eventually. Let's
That
see
would
how it
be
goes.
freaking amazing, man. A
I
Mars
know
colony.
it's
That.
gonna be. We're gonna have the first Martian pizza at some point. I don't
Awesome.
know.
Gonna be amazing, buddy. Gonna record one episode in Mars. Holy shit.
Oh,
That'd be awesome.
that would be dope. I send it to
Wow.
Earth.
Think about it.
Yeah, so that was a funny, like a cute detour. Getting back to our like Earth travels, back to Earth travels. It wasn't completely a detour because it's still within the travel, but not the
Yeah,
conventional sense that we know.
it's like travel, man. But we just made it like super geeky and sci-fi. Like,
Exactly.
now let's talk about Earth travel.
Let's
That
continue.
was awesome.
Let's talk about Earth travel. Yeah, so yeah, Earth is obviously there's a lot of places that we can still explore, and again, as you mentioned, it all comes back to your personality. Whether you want to go for the nature, you want to go for the culture. I would recommend, whether you're extrovert or introvert, do a little bit of both. Focus on what you like, but then experience this. There's no harm, right? So so that's very true. And you mentioned early on about your own ritual of getting into travel, in the you know, beginning, when you're going to the airport, before you go on your travel, you stop speaking English. Do you have any other rituals within the parameters of travels?
Well, obviously, the first and foremost is that mental preparation that you have to go through before you travel.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there are cases where I might not know the language of the country I'm traveling to. So in that case, I have to actually resort to other things, perhaps by searching Wikipedia to find out more about that country, the culture, the people, and whatnot. But ultimately, for me, as I mentioned earlier, traveling is no longer something that it's not an event or an occasion. It's a regular occurrence in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what I've always wanted to do. I mean, like, I can see that I get to travel at least once every 2 or 3 months.
Right.
And this allows me to somehow expand my perspective. And after a while, once you do this, recurrently, and then you start to have friends and partners and business associates and everything in different parts of the world, this will give you a very great sense of belonging. I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
literally, just imagine, like, you go to another country or a different language, and there you have a whole set of contacts that you can actually be in touch with, and they know you, and they respond very well, and they greet you in a different language. This is one of the best feelings in the world that I've always wanted, which is why I chose international business
Mm-hmm.
as one of my major focal points in my career, was because I really wanted that sense of belonging.
I
Other
see.
than, of course, it's very beneficial in terms of your finances. I mean, let's be honest, global business is always changing, and having different, source of income or investments in different countries will give you that sense of somehow peace of mind, because if some economy goes down, another one goes up, and this allows you to feel a lot more in control of the situation. In terms of the rituals, of course, I'm generally not somebody who can sleep well in airplanes,
Mm-hmm.
and that's one of my biggest problems, which is why I never travel any flight that is longer than 5 hours.
I see.
It's one of my, because you have to be at the airport at least I don't know 1 to 3 hours earlier, so
Mm-hmm.
that adds up to 8 hours, and that's like 1/3 of the day. So here's my rule: if there's a flight that is more than let's say 5 hours, I do not go on that path. I instead prefer, let's say for example, I want to go from Dubai to New York City. Now,
Okay.
this is going to take at least 17 hours, right?
It's gonna be long.
So here's what I'm going to do. Or let's say I want to go to Canada. Let's say I want to meet you right now.
Right,
Okay.
right.
This is going to be a long flight, dude. It's going to be 18 hours or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in this way, instead of just going directly to Toronto, I prefer to actually get a ticket somewhere near Europe. Let's say, I don't know, somewhere mid-Europe. Let's say Italy or something,
Mm-hmm.
which takes from here, let's say from Moscow, I want to go now to Spain, for example. So it's about 3 or 4 hours
Okay.
of flight. So here's what I do. If I'm supposed to meet you next week on a Monday,
Mm-hmm.
and I have 1 week, so today I will fly to Spain, and I will stay there for 4 days.
I
Pretty
see.
simple.
Right.
I stay for 4 days, and then I will actually fly to my destination to meet you, let's say in Toronto,
Mm-hmm.
and that flight is going to take a lot less time. It'll be a lot more fun as well. So that's one of my other rituals, in that I do not want to suffer for 18 hours to get to my destination, because that's not
Right.
the point. And more importantly, it's not even necessary, because it's a lot more fun to first go to one country, stay there for 4 or 5 days, and then go to the next destination, than to just be in the friggin' airport and the
Right.
airplane for 18 hours, right?
Right. Right.
This is my second ritual, which I use all the time. I chunk it up in different parts, and I stay in different countries for at least a few days to not only maybe perhaps get a language practice or just enjoy the environment, and then go to my next destination. That's another thing that I do, which is usually not as cost effective. Let's just say that, but it's something that I really care about, and I think it's wonderful.
Right. That's actually interesting. Before you continue to the next one, I actually had this discussion with someone, and they were like, "No, the straight flight is easier for me because I know I'm done." That was interesting because I think like you do, and I was like, there's no way people think differently than this, because this is obviously easier in terms of like the ease of it."
Because I cannot sleep in the airplane, dude. I mean, I just
But
can't.
I can, and I still think it's not. It's more fun, or it's sort of easier because even if I'm sleeping, I'm always in a chair for a very long time, unless I'm flying first class, which I'm not. So it's not really fun.
But even in first class, man, I cannot sleep in first class either. I mean, my problem is that if there's motion going on, I can't
Oh,
sleep.
I see. Yeah.
So whether it's first class, if I can even freaking sleep in the cockpit. Like literally, if I put my freaking head on the thigh of the fucking pilot, I still can't fucking sleep, man. I'm telling you, like, there's no way I could do that. So because of this, since for me sitting is very important, I have no choice but to land, immediately go either let's use Airbnb, or go, if I have a property there, I can just go there directly, sleep, and then enjoy for a couple of days there. Let the body adjust slowly.
Right.
Because time zones, man, come on, time zones. So instead of jumping 8 time zones, now I jump 3 time zones. Let the body adjust to it, and then jump another 3 time zones, right? And this makes the whole thing a lot more enjoyable than just going directly for 18 hours.
No, I'm not a fan of that.
8 hours of difference in time, that's too much, man.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that either, and I was so surprised when I heard that. I don't know if you were going to say something else, or that was it.
That was pretty much it, buddy, because these are the major rituals that I have for myself, and they really help me. Of course, the point is audiobooks. I never travel without audiobooks.
True.
Because I want time to be wasted. And this allows, and I cannot read again. For the same reason, I cannot sleep in airplanes or in cars or trains or whatever. I also cannot read because of motion sickness. So my only option, therefore, is audiobooks, or simply having a conversation with somebody next to me. I do that sometimes as well. Like if I happen to, be on let's say, in the presence of a pleasant person, so why not? I'm going to go talk to that person as well to fill up the time. But ultimately, it's either conversation or audiobooks, because otherwise it'll be very, very hard. I see some people, they bring their laptop and it's like working in the airplane, and I'm so jealous of them because I'm like, good for you, man. Like, if I do that, I'm going to literally get nauseated in a couple of minutes. Good for you.
Interesting. Yeah, I thankfully don't have that problem, at least not to that extent that you do. But unfortunately, I don't travel as much as you do either, so I don't have to worry about it either way. And because of that very reason, I don't have a particular ritual because I haven't, like at least an airplane travel ritual, because I haven't traveled as much as you do on a regular basis. So I don't know. I don't have a ritual, basically. Sorry.
Yes. The other point, of course, as you mentioned, the whole ritual for constant people who constantly travel with airplanes is choosing the right airlines and the right time zones and the right time of flight, because some airlines really are not compatible with your schedule.
I see.
And some airlines have much better prices, but their hours. I mean, I'm very picky about the hours of the flights.
Why is that?
Which hours? Because these are all very important. Like if I have to calculate what time is the best for me to go to get to the airport here and then there. So I got to do a lot of calculations for the time of arrival, and I will always pick the airline with the best hours, even if the cost is higher, because that will make the entire experience more worthwhile. Yes, maybe save a couple of bucks by finding this one particular airline that lands at the worst possible time, that makes you have to stay in a transit wait for like 8 hours at the airport. But dude, come on, is it really worth it? I don't think so.
Okay. That's fair. That makes a lot of sense. All right, so that's air travel, of course. I mean, you don't have to. Sometimes you do have to air travel, otherwise your other option would be to swim or something. So, but ultimately, it's about the travel and the the road that you're taking to get there, or the air road that you're taking to get there is also part of your travel, as you mentioned. Like whenever I want to go, whether on a road trip or on an airplane, my travel starts right at the moment that I step out of my door, whether it's getting into the car to go on the road or getting into the taxi to get into the airport or whatever. So yeah, I mean that should be part of your travel, and you should be enjoying that and experiencing, getting the experience out of that too. Because why not? I mean, otherwise it would be a waste of time, as you mentioned.
Exactly.
We're coming to the end of our episode here, so I want to go for the final comment straight. And if you have any final advice or comment for our audiences.
For sure, definitely. Number one, if you are listening to this podcast, understand that what is your purpose for travel? Do you want to have fun, or do you want to change and grow? If it's the former, then by all means, go find the cheapest tour you can and go to wherever place is easier and available for you right now. On the other hand, if your purpose is growth and change, then number one, choose your destinations carefully. Don't just look at the goddamn map and say, all right, they got a flight now to this country which I don't even know the name of, actually. So choose where you want to go. And if you really want to change, start learning the language of that country in advance. This gives you a huge, huge advantage during your travels.
Right.
And more importantly, avoid traveling with tours if your goal is change. Instead, try to be more independent. I'm not saying you should be a backpacker. I'm not saying you should actually work in international business so that you can actually do this as part of your work. Just try to be more independent and try to travel more independently in order to immerse yourself in a foreign culture, in that language, and more importantly, don't be shy. Make friends wherever you are, in whichever country you are. You're not supposed to have friends only from the country of your birth. You're not supposed to make friends with people who only speak your language. You're supposed to expand. We're living in a globalized world, and it's going to get even more and more pronounced as we go through, let's say, coming decades. So you want to, somehow embed that globalized mindset and live with the belief that you can communicate and connect with people around the world. And this gives you a far, far better perspective about life. And here's a good point. One of the best ways to appreciate your own language and your own culture and your own traditions is to understand that of others. Only through this contrasting process, you truly understand who you are, what you want, and where you're going. And this, more importantly, allows you to become very selective, which means you will no longer appreciate and accept everything your culture tells you to do. You can become a lot more open-minded and create what I call a super culture. A super culture is a personal culture made by combining the best aspects of your most different cultures. And that will give you a far, far better perspective about life, makes you a lot happier, a lot more independent. And this, from my perspective, is a foundation for success. I've rarely met people who are extremely bright or successful who have not had a lot of international experiences, because that is really, really paramount to acquiring a solid perspective and grasp of reality by traveling and understanding your culture as well as that of others.
Amazing. That's very true. The comparison makes a lot of sense because it helps you to think differently outside of the box. It makes you to explore different opportunities, ideas, and I'm really happy that I got to do as much as I did, although it wasn't a lot. But then anything will do. It doesn't have to be significant. If it can be, let it be. Sure, but then don't think of it as in a sense that I don't have the resources. Anything will do. Just do it. Do it and do it right. And with that, we have come to the end of this episode. And ultimately, I want to tell you, thank you, Dan, again for being with us.
Always a pleasure being with you, my man.
Thank you very much. And I'm Puya LJ, aka Poujix. Have a great one until our next episode.